Good afternoon, everyone. I think we can start. So, I'm Xavier Damman. I'm at Damman on Twitter, and I'm an entrepreneur, but also a hacker. And so I was the co-founder of Storify, that's been acquired by Livefire. And I also love hacking. And today I'd like to talk to you about CSS, and specifically about how can we remove the CSS rules that we have that we don't need and don't use. And so first I want to talk about why does this matters. It's a well-known fact that speed matters. And for companies like Amazon and e-commerce companies, like they find out that every 100 milliseconds increase revenue by 1%. So that's quite important. But also, I think more importantly nowadays, because not everybody has an e-commerce website necessarily, but with mobile networks, devices are much slower. It's one thing on desktop computer, you don't care too much, you have a lot of bandwidth, but when you are on the go with your mobile phone, it takes much more time. So Ilya, the talk also earlier today, did this other presentation talking about performance matters, and basically the line that I found out was 1 second. You really don't want to cross that threshold in terms of how quickly does your site load on any device. And so that's basically the budget that you have when you develop and when you test your site. And so today, with all of those new devices on the go, when you're using 3G or 4G, the problem is that they're quite slow. So 4G is obviously much better, but you don't always have 4G. And even in a conference like today or whenever you go and if there's a lot of people, there's a lot of interference and you don't get that much coverage. Or when you take the Muni or the Tube, you also don't get that much coverage, and so the connection can be really spotty. And so I'm sure you already had that experience when you're on your phone and this thing doesn't load and it takes forever. And so one of the first things is actually latency. So it's about 100 milliseconds, one trip. So every time you need to do a call to a new server, that's 100 milliseconds. So if you load your pages from 10 different networks, that's going to take a second right there. Then the bandwidth, the loading speed can really vary between 100 kilobyte seconds to a megabyte or so, but also it takes time to ramp up. And so when you develop HTML5 applications or websites, actually you don't download megabytes of stuff, right? Every single file that you download are actually only a few K, and so you actually never have the time to actually reach out those performance. And so on average, a good rule of thumb is just to assume that people are going to load your stuff with 100 kilobytes per second. And so to simulate that, there is this great tool I found out on the internet provided by Apple, actually, that really allows you in your settings to simulate 3G speed. And I think this is really useful because it simulates also the round trip time, the latency, and the bandwidth that you have. Just don't forget to turn it off before complaining that your Wi-Fi is really slow. True story. Using that tool, I actually went on some website that I used to go, and it's kind of amazing to see like so many different requests and downloads, total download size, simulating a 3G connections. Like it takes forever. Now this is the entire load time of everything, right? It shows up on the page faster than that, hopefully, but still. Imagine when you are abroad and you have, you need to pay for roaming. I mean, this is kind of crazy that loading just one page on a mobile device is actually that big. But more importantly, I think what matters really the most actually is the user experience. Like really how quickly can your page show up on the page. So there are a few strategies to help with that. So the first one is obviously latency, reducing the number of requests. And by now, everybody already know that you should compile all your JavaScript files into one, all your CSS files into one. Everybody should know that. And that's really important to do, especially on mobile devices. The second thing is reduce the payload, right? So every 10 kilobyte is actually going to be 100 milliseconds. And again, like you only have a second, a budget of 1 second to make sure that your page show up. So every 10 kilobyte that you can save really matters. And then CPU, reduced number of things to compute. doesn't matter on your laptop, but on mobile device, it can. So the thing that matters the most is compiling everything in a limited number of files, but CSS matters a lot, and it's been a lot overlooked in the optimization process. And why it matters is because actually CSS is part of the critical path for the browser, which means that before the browser loads your CSS, it cannot show anything. It cannot paint anything on the page. So if for whatever reason, like it takes a second to load your CSS, then for a second, the browser will basically show nothing but white space, which could be really frustrating. And remember, like 3G speed and stuff, you should think about 100 kilobytes per second. So Ilya said, like, this is the reason why you need to get all your CSS as early as possible. So that's why we actually put the CSS in the header. Concatenate them, minify them, and then also remove redundant rules. Anything that you can do to accelerate CSS, fetching of CSS will help you get faster user experience. And the problem that we have today with CSS is that CSS is bloated. There's multiple reasons for that. The first thing is things like bootstraps. Those are really great, and one of the most successful GitHub repository out there. A lot of people are using it. It's great. The problem is you download 100 kilobytes, which is a second, basically, on 3G speed, of CSS rules, and you only need 10% of it. And still, your file is there, and you force everybody to load it. But not only things like Bootstrap, also like, for large websites that you've been, if you have a team of people who worked on this website for more than a year, you keep adding rules, and everybody is afraid to remove rules because they're afraid to see, like, hey, is this going to break something? So nobody never remove anything, and you keep appending to those CSS files. And so they also become gigantic. There's also so the two advantages of removing the CSS rules that you don't need is, so first, obviously, it's going to make your CSS file much smaller, which is great for download. But it also is much less things to compute to the CPU in the browser, basically. Because for the way the browser works, it's going to actually parse the entire CSS, and for each CSS rule, it's going to see if there is a corresponding DOM element. And so if you have a CSS rule and there is no corresponding thing in the DOM, well, it's still going to use those CPU cycles to go, look through the DOM. So you basically want to avoid those. And so there is basically a speed improvement. There's a great blog post here. I'll share my slides as well so that you can click on the links. We did basically this on different browsers, on average, kind of 20% speed improvement. The fastest rule is the one that doesn't exist. So getting rid of unused rules is one of the best things you can do to optimize CSS performance. So I was looking at, okay, how can we do to remove those CSS in a automatic fashion? And so I stumbled upon this project by an Italian guy, a student called Guillermo Martino, and he did this thing called uncss. And so what does that thing do? It basically, given an HTML page, it's fires up a headerless browser like Phantom.js, loads all the CSS files. So we actually look at the HTML page, look at all the CSS files that are referenced by the page, loads them, and then goes through each of the rules. And for each rules, basically, it's going to see if there is a matching DOM element in the page. And if there is one, then it's going to keep it. And if there isn't, they're going to just remove it. And you can also define some extra parameters like ignore if you want to force keeping some rules. So an earlier version of uncss was not using Phantom.js, and the problem was that then it would only work for pages that wouldn't have JavaScript. But now this new version uses Phantom.js, which is great because basically it's going to run all the JavaScript that you have. And so if your JavaScript at runtime is adding or modifying the DOM, this is still going to be taken into account. The limitation, though, is if you are modifying the DOM on events that have to be triggered by the user, there is no way for Phantom.js to find out about that. So that's an example, a case where you will want to use the ignore parameter, for example, to say, always include in the resulting CSS this type of classes, for example, that you really want to have. So let's do a quick demo. I think demos are always great. So here I basically have recording finished. That's not cool. Sorry. All right. So. The what? Oh. 93%, that should be fine. Okay, so basically, so here, so I've downloaded like just a Bootstrap theme that you can find readily available online. Like this one is free, it's called Freelancer. I'm gonna unzip this file. And basically what I have here, I'm just gonna run a quick HTTP server. I love this quick tool. You can quickly install it by npm install g HTTP server, and that makes a really quick ND HTTP server in any directory where you are. And so here's just my Bootstrap theme that I just downloaded. As we can see, if we go here in the network, you should be able to see the CSS being loaded. Here we go. And so we can see it's 102 kilobytes. That's the minified version of Bootstrap. If you go to audits, you can actually run an audit on the page. And what it does tells you, like, hey, look, one of the good things that you should be doing to improve performance is remove unused CSS rules. There are 1,500 CSS rules that you're actually not using in this page. So how can we do that? Well, so you can install npm install g and CSS, and so I've already done that, so I already have it here. So what I can do is, let me go to this file. Up. Is it big enough? Can everybody see it? Okay. So on CSS, you can do --help, and you have some help here. So I can basically just pass the index.html, and then I'm gonna turn that into let's just call it uncss.css. And so what it's doing, it's just opening index.html, looking for all the things. And so what I'm going to do is show you that. So the original CSS files was 102 kilobytes. And if I do the same thing now, you will see that uncss.css is only 22 kilobytes. So that's actually 5x. That you save like 100 milliseconds right there. And if I load the index.html page, I can just up and css.css, and I'm gonna reload the page. So you can see that the page is exactly the same because all the rules that are actually needed are just right there. And so instead of having 1,500 unused rules, I'm down to 400. And that's probably because it's loading other stuff. I have Chrome extensions that are loading other CSS here. But so as you can see, like it improved dramatically the number and the request here. You will see my file now is 22. That's a bit small, but that's 22 kilobytes. So that's very good. That's a good start. The other thing is, it would be better if you can automate that somehow. And so you can do that using grunt or gulp. And for the purpose of this, I'm going to use grunt. So I'm going to undo this. And then we're going to do... so you can install, I don't know if you are familiar with grunt, but basically you can install it by just npm install -g for making it the global thing. And then basically you need a grunt file, .js, and up function grunt. And basically what we need to do here is init a configuration where we're going to just define a rule for uncss. And we're going to define a build step where we're going to have some and I have up. I can do so. I don't know, for those of you who are unfamiliar with Grunt, it's basically a build process to make sure you can do a lot of great things, like minifying. There's a lot of different recipes that you can find online, plugins. So basically what I'm saying here to Grunt is to say, like, okay, load the page, like you're gonna, for uncss, we want to generate the page, the CSS file, this/css/index.css, and the input is gonna be index.html. And so once I'm doing this, do I have enough? And then once I have that, I need to do the load npm task grunt uncss. So you need to download that, obviously, and I can show you in a second. That's easy enough. And then I can just register the task. So the way you install grunt and CSS is npm install grunt and CSS, and it's gonna do everything for you. That's really easy. Then once you have that, you basically you can run grunt build, and fatal error, unable to find local grunt, npm install grunt. Great, the internet is working. Perfect. Up, npm grunt and CSS. Here we go. Task build not found. So still an error right there somewhere. What did I do? Oh, it's I did default. Let me see. Here we go. So just grunt is a default task. So as you can see, by just running grunt, it created this file, this CSS index.css, and it's 22 kilobyte, and the original one was 130 kilobyte. Now another thing that you can add to grunt is actually called grunt watch. Contrib watch. And this will allow you to actually make sure that grunt keep watching specific files. And so every time you're going to modify those files, it's going to rerun the task for you. So here we're going to do it for basically, I'm going to just copy paste. It's going to be easier. So here basically we're going to tell him to say, like, watch the files that are in the CSS directory, all the CSS files right there, and watch the index.html, because we basically want that every time we're going to add new rules to the CSS, or every time we're going to add or remove DOM elements in the page, we want the process to run again. And when that happens, we want to run the task on CSS. I also need to load this. Here we go. So now I can run grunt watch. Oh, unable to find. I'm not in the right directory. Here we go. So now it's watching, and so now if I touch the CSS file, Bootstrap, for example, .css, boom, it detects that the file changed, and it's running the process again. Now, what's interesting is I'm going to open here the index file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove from my index.html page like the navigation bar. So this is a bit complicated. It's a bit complicated with such a big font. Where is nav? Oof. So here we go. I should be about this one, 65. So from here we go. So I've removed the navigation bar from my, and automatically you can see that now it rerun for me the uncss process, and now instead of 22 kilobytes, it's 17 kilobytes. So it actually removed additional rules that now I don't need anymore because I don't have a navigation bar. So that's the way you can automate this process. For more information, so I did a quick blog post about it, so you can find it on bit.ly/grunt-uncss. There is also, you can do that and try it online with uncss.io. And then here is the link to the main repository for the main uncss on GitHub. And then another great blog post who also talks about that. With that, if you have any questions. Yep.
So how do you set this up when you have a lot of web pages?
So when you have a lot of web pages, how do we set this up? So the best way is probably to define like different classes of pages, because you have, like, for example, for Storify, you will have a profile page, you will have a story page, and home page. Basically, those are the main pages. And so for each of those, you can define a different rule in your grunt file, and so to compress those, and then don't use them. I think that's probably the best way to do it.
Would you generate an CSS for each class and then concatenate them, or would you generate one?
I will generate one for each class. That's probably the easiest one. The thing that you need to make sure is that whatever page you're going to use as the template needs to have all the CSS rules that, for example, if you have a story page in our case, and if some stories have different elements in the page, then you need to make sure that, you have kind of a template that takes care of, showing all the different possibilities in one single page. That's how you will do it. The other option that you can do is, and that's actually something that that's kind of the goal of uncss.io is to actually offer you the ability to prepend in your link href tag uncss.io, so that the server will automatically generate a custom style sheet just for that page. So basically the way it will work is because it knows the referrer, it knows that, okay, I need to basically load all of those different CSS, and then I need to provide a new CSS file that's going to only need to match this page. And so that would be a way so you could also actually do that locally as well. Like you can have your own uncss server if you want.
Can you hook it up with Selenium to then test those JavaScript action kind of things?
So the question is, can you look it up with Selenium? So what would be the goal? The goal would be to make sure that the...
Use Selenium to simulate your user interactions and then have CSS, automate that thing you talk about with you.
Oh, that's interesting. That will solve the problem of if you have user actions to, that change the DOM of the document. That's actually an interesting thought. Didn't think about that. That might be interesting to add. That's a good idea for a pull request. Yes?
Do you recommend using CSS when it's finalized version of the site right for development? Because I'm trying to imagine, like, say I have to go back and edit something, and I don't have those styles, would I have to manually put them in myself?
Yeah, so that's why, in the same way that you minify and compress all of those things only when you go and package that for production, I think you should do the same thing, right? I mean, I think the most important thing, and that's why I love Bootstrap. I'm absolutely not saying that you should not use Bootstrap. I think it's awesome. Everything that makes the life of a developer easier, it's better because it helps you develop faster. So here's the same thing, right? You would want, in the example I gave, like, you will want to actually modify directly, your CSS files and not worry about having to clean it up, right? Because you don't know what needs to be used or not. So what I will do is whenever you go to production, run these things to clean things up, and don't worry about it. Yep.
So talking optimization, 10 milliseconds equals 10K, etc. And I'm wondering if you've test it. If I'm generating new CSS per page, or have something that does it automatically, there's no more cache on my browser because I can't reuse that same 100K file.
Yeah, so that's the big trade-off, right? I mean, the kind of the reason why you will want to actually do that per class of page is because you will argue that, well, then the cache of the browser will kick in, and as you go through the page, you will have a benefit there. So that's true. Now, it also depends on your site, but for many sites out there, actually the number of pages viewed per session is actually closer to 1 than to 2, actually. And so because of that, actually what we realized that, well, most of the time, actually people have to download everything anyway. So that's one thing. The other thing too is that when you open your page, like there is a lot of people right now who get to your page through social networks. And so they actually don't open Safari or Chrome, they actually open a web view. And those views, like they don't necessarily have already the thing that you have in cache necessarily. And the size of the cache is also much smaller on mobile devices than on your desktop. So all in all, I really think that you should optimize for, okay, let's pretend that the user lands directly to this page for the very first time, and how can we make sure that the experience is the best, is possibly the best, right? Because you could argue that, well, actually, I would trade off loading less optimized loading time of the second page than of the first page, because if once the user has one page to look at, well, it's better in my opinion.
It would be a good strategy to pretty much look at what your most visited pages are, and
yep.
Specifically, because you don't need to load the entire website for your homepage.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also like something, a practice that we've seen on many websites where you have your CSS rules and then you just, every page loads them all, right? And your home page is really different than your profile page. It's really different than another product page or whatever that is. And so at the very least by class, I think there is a lot of things that you can actually save by removing them. Yep. Yes, the question is yes. So the question is, have you thought about going back to less or SAS or all of those things, right? And doing source map to see right from the SAS files which are the rules that are not being used, right? So yeah, so that's the limitation of the system, and that's the problem that we have as well. We also use we use stylus, for example. So if you use any of those type of preprocessors, like, it's really hard to do the mapping. So right now, this is not being taken into account, which is a problem. But I would argue, like the previous question about, like, hey, do I need to work off of the optimized version as a developer? And I would say no. I mean, keep working out of the less version, SAS version, or stylus version, or whatever version you are using that is easy for you, and then you can, just when you go to production, do that. The thing, but that would be cool too. That's another good pull request. Yep. Other questions? More questions? Yeah. Sorry, does it only work with HTML files or? Yeah, it's HTML, but whether the page has been generated by PHP, JavaScript, Python, or Java, it's using Phantom.js. So basically, as long as you can load it in your browser and it generates a dumb HTML, basically, it parses HTML. That's what it does, right? And so you can also give it raw HTML if you want to. If you have a different process. So what you can do also is just go through all of the HTML templates that you have and then give it to CSS and it will work as well. So you can give raw HTML strings, you can give it URL, HTTP, or directly an HTML file. And that will apply its magic. All right. Thank you very much.